Good evening and welcome to the Week in Review. I'm Amanda Vinicky. Paris Schatz has the evening off. We'll be joined by our Week in Review guests in just a moment, but first, some of today's top stories. Chicago police have made arrests in connection with a pair of high-profile crimes. Superintendent David Brown says it's a message for offenders. They won't get away with it.
We are going to be relentless in pursuing you and bringing you to justice and charging you, holding you accountable to the fullest extent of the law. And you can run, but you can't hide.
A 38-year-old man from Hammond is accused of felony theft for a smash-and-grab burglary. He allegedly stole 5 watches worth $1 million from the Perillo luxury auto dealership in December. And a Bronzeville liquor store security guard faces a murder charge for allegedly firing the shots that killed bystander Bobby Johnson on Tuesday. Detectives say she'd still be alive were it not for the reckless behavior of the guard, who'd been aiming for another man who is still at large. The CPD itself is under pressure to solve more crimes. Illinois' COVID positivity rate has dropped significantly from 9.4% to 5.8%. Still, Governor J.B. Pritzker says while the metrics are going in the right direction, he's not ready to drop the statewide indoor mask mandate.
So I'm very pleased that we were able to weather this COVID storm, the Omicron COVID storm that came through. I believe that we should remove masks as soon as we possibly can. I am constantly listening to the doctors and scientists and encouraging them. When can we do this? What's the right time? What's the right way to do it? And so very hopeful we'll be able to make some announcements about that.
The governor didn't give specifics. Even if Illinois' mask mandate is lifted, local governments and private businesses would be able to impose their own. The state public health department today reports about 60,400 new COVID cases this week, half the amount of new cases reported this time last week. 9 activists arrested while protesting Jason Van Dyke's release from prison say they won't let up as they seek justice for Laquan McDonald.
We are literally in another civil rights movement right now as we speak. We are on the right side of history. You're not going to shame us into thinking that you could just arrest this away. You cannot police away racism. You cannot intimidate us into that.
Van Dyke, a former Chicago police officer, served less than half of his 7-year prison sentence for the 2014 murder of Chicago teen Laquan McDonald. He was released yesterday. The activists, calling themselves the Laquan 9, inspired by the Little Rock 9, face disorderly conduct charges. They're pressuring U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois, John Lausch, to press federal charges and want Illinois Senators Dick Durbin and Tammy Duckworth to help force the issue. And we'll have more on that with our Week in Review panel. Joining us are Sarah Karp of WBEZ, Chuck Gowdy of ABC7 Chicago, Laura Washington of the Chicago Sun-Times and ABC7, and debut appearance for Jacoby Cochran of City Cast Chicago. Welcome all, and let's get right to it. As you just heard, activists and lawmakers are calling for the Department of Justice to consider federal civil rights charges against Jason Van Dyke. Chicago tonight sat down with McDonald's grandmother. Here's her response when asked about Van Dyke's early release.
It's a very hurt feeling because that man didn't serve his time. He did not serve his time. But you know, that man took everything from me. That man took my firstborn grandchild from me. The only thing I'm trying to make right is getting justice for my grandson.
Now, Chuck, Van Dyke was convicted of 16 counts of aggravated battery as well as a second-degree murder charge. I repeat, murder. How is he out after something like 3 years in prison?
Well, he did serve his time under the law and the regulations in the state of Illinois. Second-degree murder, the sentence that he got, he or anybody else is entitled to release after roughly half of the time for good behavior. Those are the regulations in Illinois. They can be changed if people don't like them. They haven't been in a long time, but in his particular case, he was treated no differently than anyone else, at least when it comes to that part of his release.
Treated differently in other ways, Chuck? Are you talking about perhaps that we couldn't learn easily his whereabouts?
Well, clearly the Illinois Department of Corrections offered him advantages in terms of the release of public information that virtually nobody else is afforded. I mean, even Drew Peterson, as he was transferred around, it seemed as though there was more information released by the state for Peterson. And clearly there are many other far more dangerous individuals, terrorists, mass murderers across the country. And the not only federal authorities, but state authorities, wherever they're being held, there is far more transparency in the way those cases are handled. I mean, the IDOC, the Illinois Department of Corrections, seemed to subscribe to the Blackhawk school of transparency in the way that they dealt with this, especially in the last week, if not the last several years. That Van Dyke was moved around to different prisons. You'd ask for information, you'd get nothing. They'd always claim that it was security-based. But obviously, after he was released, there was no security issue, and they still were very slow and provided very little details.
And you said that he served his time followed by the rules of the law. Is it double jeopardy at all? Or explain, because as we just heard from McDonald's grandmother, among those that are seeking further justice on the federal level. So, Laura, what could John Lausch, or for that matter, U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland, do in this case?
Well, what they can do is, and what the activists are calling for, is to thoroughly investigate the circumstances and to see if there's an opportunity to file civil rights charges in this case. This is something that's been under investigation for quite a while. It was under investigation early on, back in 2014, 2015, and nothing came of that in terms of federal charges. It appears that they were sort of set aside when the state's attorney's office finally moved ahead and filed charges against Van Dyke. And because there was a change in administration, because Donald Trump's administration came in, his Justice Department came in, and they were not inclined or very interested in prosecuting police officers. In fact, they've been extremely supportive of police officers. Nothing ever really happened. But I think what you and Chuck were talking about earlier points to this, reinforces the perception that police officers still, to this day, even after all we went through with Laquan McDonald, are treated differently than others in the criminal justice system, and they are protected. You got to remember that it was almost 50 years. It took 50 years for a police officer, an on-duty police officer, to be convicted of a crime of this nature. So there's, again, it creates a concern that police officers are going to continue to get a break even in these circumstances.
Jacoby, what of that? Is this a sign that the feds need to come in to show that times have changed? Would that reopen old wounds, or perhaps would new charges heal wounds?
I mean, I believe we're 7-8 years into this case at this point. If the feds were going to bring charges up, I imagine they would have done that already. I do feel like this is just going to put us in a situation in which we're reaching for the most minuscule thing that we can hold on to, which is charges, maybe more jail time. But even Laquan's great uncle came out and said that Van Dyke could get 1,000 years, and that's not actually going to change the way police officers move through the state of Illinois, through the city of Chicago. I mean, just in the last year, we've watched police officers, chase down and shoot people in Portage Park and shoot a kid in the chest in Little Village. And they weren't reprimanded immediately. They weren't, taking off their job, full time. And so I think we're still wanting more, but we're not going to get it in this case. And so I do feel that we are going to just tear open old wounds as the city, as Black and brown communities keep asking for the bare minimum. And, Chuck said on his release, he wasn't treated any differently under the law, but everything prior to that, the way he was sentenced, the way he was treated, the way the city, the union, the mayor's office participated in a cover-up on his behalf, he was treated differently at every other point during this. So his release timing, I don't really care if that goes by the letter of the law.
Now, Sarah, let's hone in some on this notion of change. Mayor Lori Lightfoot reminded those disappointed by Van Dyke's release that it is still rare for a police officer to be convicted of something involving while they were on duty, and further saying that it did spur change with the consent decree that now governs the Chicago Police Department. So what has materially changed since, McDonald's death and Van Dyke's conviction?
Well, what's the biggest thing that's changed, that we do have a consent decree, but what she forgot to say is that much of the consent decree hasn't been followed. I mean, there's, very small portions, things are just sort of inching along. And there's a lot of concerns because, even if you look at like the foot chase policy that was put in place post Adam Toledo's murder or death, it's not a murder because I think he wasn't charged, but his killing, that should have been put in place per the consent decree, but it wasn't. And it just shows that there's just all these little steps that are going along that, is there really change on the street where, like, when police officers come in contact with people, that there's new ways of dealing with the public? And I'm not so sure there's that many policies that have been put in place and that are really enforced.
Does anybody?
Amanda,
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Amanda, that when the Justice Department comes in, they use a phrase called pattern and practice. And that really is the basis for then creating this consent decree. There clearly have been changes in the pattern, the template, the rules, the regulations. What really is important here is what the practice is on a daily basis in Chicago neighborhoods. And the jury is clearly out on whether or not there has been enough change in the practice of all of this.
And Laura, you want to jump in?
Amanda, even David Brown, the police superintendent, has said that he is disappointed and frustrated by the slowness of reform and by the reluctance on part of some officers, even higher up in the rank and file, higher up in his administration, to get on board in terms of doing a better job of community policing, doing a better job of being out on the street and being responsive to the community. He's been criticized internally, off the record comments to the Sun-Times by his own top people, and his response is they need to get with the program. And of course, as was mentioned earlier, the union has never really been embraced or really been on board with some of these reforms and changes. So it's been very slow and very painful progress so far.
Let's stick on the Chicago police, but another former officer, and this is Sergeant Ronald Watts. More than 100 convictions have been overturned in cases that are connected with Sergeant Watts. State's Attorney Kim Foxx, who, by the way, will be on Black Voices here on WTTW tomorrow night for an exclusive interview, was on hand this week as 19 cases of those wrongfully convicted were tossed. Jacoby, more than 100 cases. How does something like this happen?
115 cases. The way this happens is by people for generations turning and looking away. We just had City Council give some of the biggest police misconduct suits, in relation to Commander John Burge. And so if anyone believes that there are not police officers still out here shaking people down, planting false evidence, giving false testimonies, then you're probably highly mistaken. This only happens with multiple people participating, multiple people turning away, and deciding that this is okay, depending on where it is happening. Because it was happening in the Ida B. Wells homes for so long, people didn't care what was going on in the projects. And so now, even years later, we're still seeing case after case be thrown out because this has been a problem for generations.
Now, Sarah, there has been some shuffling at the police department with David Brown, according to the Sun-Times, moving members of the community safety team to now answering patrols. Is this a sign that Brown is listening to feedback, combating crime, or that he lacks vision?
Well, putting more police on the street, I'm not exactly sure that is the vision that people really want. I mean, people want law and order, but they also want some compassion for people who are in situations that leave them vulnerable to committing crimes. So I think that there's a balance here. Do we turn to this really law enforcement state where people are being arrested right and left and kept in prison for long periods of time? Or do we think about how do we get to some of the roots of some of the reasons why people are committing crimes and people are involved in violence? And I think that's a balance. And I think, to some degree, Mayor Lightfoot has tried to say we have to sort of attack the root, but then on the other hand, she's very much like people aren't being locked up enough and people aren't staying in prison enough. And so do we swing to the pendulum where we just, sort of keep, filling the prisons more and more with people, mostly Black males, Latino males, And we just get back, we're in this state where that's, so many people of the community, our parents, brothers, sisters are spending their lives in prison. And so I think that there has to be some balance. And, of course, the longer term solutions are not through policing, but they take a while to set in if you can really get to them.
And let's move on now to our political notebook, because there is a lot going on there, including the Republican National Committee today censuring two high-profile Republicans, and that is U.S. Representative Liz Cheney of Wyoming and also Illinois' own Congressman Adam Kinzinger. Now, Chuck, the RNC says that by participating in the U.S. House committee that is investigating the January 6, 2021 riot at the U.S. Capitol, that Kinzinger is participating in the persecution, that is, of ordinary citizens engaged in, quote, again, legitimate political discourse. So when it comes to this January 6th insurrection, you have Republicans initially denouncing it, then downplaying. Is this at the point of outright denial?
Well, maybe the people who said that today have gone on a TV-free January or the last year, because they clearly didn't look at the videos that we continue to review and put on television of what happened on January 6th. I mean, no sane person could look at those videos, could read through the arrest reports, could look at the number of people who were hospitalized and continue to this day to be affected by what happened there and say those things.
And people were killed. There's people who were killed. There's law enforcement that were killed during that. They died because of all the pressure that they were facing. And that you can think that this was just a tame political comments. I think that's just, it's a different reality that they're living in.
Jacoby,
Amanda,
I
think it shows how firmly the Donald Trump wing of the party, the Donald Trump response to the election, to the January 6th events, to the whole election denial, the denial that Joe Biden was elected president. I think this shows you how firmly that grip is on there. And this is the RNC, this is the Republican National Committee, the biggest Republican political organization in the country.
So what more does this mean for Kinzinger? He's already not running for re-election. Does this have any impact on him or on Illinois Republicans?
Well, I think Kinzinger he's out of the game, other than the fact that he will continue to serve on the January 6th committee and will be a voice, I think, of some reason on that committee. But he's already said he's not running for re-election. He's not going to run for any other higher office. So politically, it's not going to make any difference. I think it's a challenge for Illinois Republicans, especially those who are firmly in the grip of the Trump philosophy, because they have to respond to many other more moderate Republicans and Democrats, particularly in these statewide races, who just don't understand this mentality. You saw this with Richard Irvin this week. Richard Irvin, who is one of the newest candidates to get in the race to run against J.B. Pritzker on the Republican side, and he's not willing to even talk about Trump, even though Trump has such a huge influence in the state of Illinois. So Trump is going to continue to be front and center in these races going forward.
And let's get to that. Illinois Republicans, as you're talking about them, they've slammed Governor J.B. Pritzker's election year budget. Here is what the governor had to say in his annual address.
Inflation is squeezing Illinois families. Government ought to do more to ease the pain and put more money in the pockets of hardworking Illinoisans.
And so conventional wisdom may have been that the pandemic was going to make state budgeting tough. Instead, Pritzker has a whole lot of money to play with. Now, Jacoby, is this because he is frugal, good at managing? What?
We got them Fed dollars. We know that some revenue is returned to the state, but a lot of this has to do with the windfall of federal money that the state is given. And Pritzker really sounded like a guy who had money to spend. He, as somebody who teaches public speaking and speech writing, I was paying close attention to this pocket he established where he didn't want to offend anybody. He didn't want to try to inspire anybody too much. He used words like defund and locked up in very strategic ways. And at the end of the speech, it seemed like I got all this money. I'm going to give it to as many people as I can. And who's going to be mad at me? With that being said, as we look at the family relief plan, how much is that $1 billion going to help Illinois families when we look at these investments in family and child care services, investment in violence prevention? What is that going to mean in the long term, and especially once these federal dollars dry up? Because, Pritzker touted a $1.7 billion surplus. But when you get into the weeds, it might turn out to be a $1.5 billion deficit. So he sounds like a man who got a lot of money, but I wonder if he got as much money, for the budget as he does, obviously, for his reelection.
I think there's going to be.
He also sounds like somebody who's running for reelection.
Exactly.
The dollars always appear in years like this.
Ain't that lucky?
Tax break this year. I mean, what a great thing for him to be able to give a tax break.
I have a feeling that there's going to be, I don't know about 1.7 billion, but a whole lot of money spent on commercials with that very phrase. Now, here's where the justice system and politics intersect, and that, of course, is when politicians get in trouble. You have, for example, the feds pushing to send Alderman Ricardo Munoz, former alderman that is, to prison for using campaign dough on personal luxuries. And while that court filing where a mentor had evidently texted Munoz this advice: pick your 10 friends, make them millionaires, and they will take care of you legally. Now, Chuck, is this just how Illinois politics, how Chicago politics work there in writing?
Well, I thought you were reading back the state of Illinois motto there when you just said that. I mean, we laugh about this, but it's the sad reality in this state, with so many people having been prosecuted in public life and sent to prison. It is the way of Illinois. It remains that, with Illinois being one of the, if not the most corrupt state in the union, with elected officials at all different levels of government being investigated, prosecuted, and then incarcerated in many cases.
And then including among them a Daley facing charges. Laura, did you think you'd ever see the day? We're talking, by the way, about Alderman Patrick Daley Thompson.
Alderman Patrick Daley Thompson, who will go on trial. His trial officially kicks off on Monday. He is being looked at for some financial misdeeds in terms of how he pays his taxes, and whether or not he paid off a loan to a bank. He's a Daley. This is the first time a member of the Daley family has risen, or I should say descended, to be the subject of federal charges. So I think it's going to be a very high-profile race. And, we're a few years away from the reign of the Daleys. So when you say if I would ever see this, Amanda, sooner or later, as Chuck points out, that the corruption seems to creep into every aspect of politics, and even the mighty fall, and even maybe perhaps we'll see, perhaps the Daley dynasty may fall.
And there is a shakeup, meanwhile, at the top of the Chicago Teachers Union, with CTU President Jesse Sharkey saying he won't seek re-election. Take a look.
The point is to meet goals, and then pass the baton to the next layer of people who can continue serving the mission of the union.
Sarah, we don't have a ton of time left, but I know he's leaving quite a legacy, also wanting to leave that legacy by having his current VP, Stacey Davis Gates, take over. If union members choose that, where does that leave relations between the union and Chicago Public Schools?
Well, I put out there to Stacey Davis Gates, the mayor doesn't really like you. I mean, it's even more than like. It's
That's a nice way of saying it.
Yeah, I mean that's
mutual hate, Sarah. It's mutual hate.
Let's just put it this way: in the days where the 2019 strike was being hashed out, the last couple of days, Stacey Davis Gates was not in some of those final meetings. Jesse Sharkey was. The lawyers were, but not Stacey Davis Gates, because the mayor just could not be there together. It was like this wasn't going to get settled ever if they were both in the room. However, one of the things that Stacey Davis Gates says is listen, this is a sharp disagreement about the way that the school system should be run. And this is not just a petty fight. This is not just about who likes who. It's about, some really big, it's policy. And I do think that is it. I mean, I think that Stacey Davis Gates and a lot of people in the teachers union think that Lightfoot is not looking out for the best interests of children, and I think probably Lightfoot thinks in some different ways that the union doesn't look out in the best interests of children, and so there's definite disagreements. And this is the other thing. This is a year when the mayor is running for re-election. For next year she has a re-election, and putting Stacey Davis Gates at the head of the teachers union is, you know, that it makes for a more tense situation. So I don't think that Davis Gates is going to be, you know, particularly kind to the mayor as she's running.
Certainly not.
You know.
And meanwhile, we have, of course, a blow up with Rocky Works pushing back on how the Blackhawks are going to handle sexual assault going forward. So maybe fans will be on ice with the Hawks, and festivals are coming back. A whole lot of fun. Wanted to ask you guys your favorite festival, so maybe we'll take to social media for that. With that, we are out of time. So our thanks to Sarah Karp, Chuck Gowdy, Laura Washington, and Jacoby Cochran. That is our show for this Friday night. Don't forget, you can get Chicago Tonight and the Week in Review streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. And be sure to join us tomorrow night at 6 for Chicago Tonight, Latino Voices. Then immediately after that, Chicago Tonight, Black Voices at 6:30. Then we're back at 7 o'clock next week. Now for the Week in Review, I'm Amanda Vinicky. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe and warm, and good night.